start right in with the first one. Mental game study group interest. Instead of talking hands, we discuss our mental state. That's kind of cool. Sometimes just talking about it and hearing a second reason can help a lot. I'm not trying to create a place where you can whine about bad beats, but how you can, example, handle them better. That's really cool. I think this type of group could be really beneficial. And it doesn't mean you can't post a hand history in it. It's just that the direction of any hand history posted is to identify the root of the problem, which is always going to be more introspective than looking at it on the surface level, like what is the correct line or what's the correct play at this decision point. I think a lot of what acceleration in the learning process comes down to is using a specific situation to expose what the core imbalance is that seems to perpetuate that leak. So I think a group that really intends to get to the root of the imbalances is one that's got a shitload of potential. I personally struggle more with my mental game than my actual poker game, he says. Every session is a battle, and I often feel worse after breaking down mentally more than making a poker mistake. Someone asked me recently, how do you go about dealing with the problem of not being able to play long sessions because you actually get triggered very easily by losing pots? So yeah, you end up being in a pickle because on one hand you want to only be playing from your A game, yet on the other hand you know that if you only play from your A game, you're not going to put in enough volume because you're the type of guy who gets triggered pretty regularly. So my solution to this, I sort of outlined this in the mental game pack, but you have to make a decision of what's actually more important to you for the longevity of your career. For instance, if you're not capable of putting in a lot of hours at the table or grinding, you'll never actually get the results that you want because your career will always be obstacled by your inability to put in volume. So at some point, the way that we balance the paradox of not playing our A game often enough and not being able to put in enough volume because we can't get to a state where we can play our A game often enough needs to be to sacrifice one of them temporarily. So there have been stages in my career, and it's something I've advocated to students who struggle to play enough volume, where you have to sacrifice your A game to prove to yourself that you can actually play through stretches without needing to play your A game. So it's almost counterintuitive. The goal of it, like if you do this right, you basically set a volume goal for the month and you make that your priority over playing your A game. So by the end of the month, yeah, maybe you've leaked more because you've played your B minus game, but you've proven to yourself that you will not be stopped by mental tilt and you can put in 50, 75,000 hands over the course of a month. And by doing that, you gain a certain angle of conviction in your game that knows that you will not be sort of like derailed by mental tilt. And then in doing that, it stabilizes the lack of confidence in being able to just sit down and play. And once you have that, you can go back and be like, okay, now that I know that I can play through because I've proven it to myself experientially, now I'm going to try to rebalance that with playing through from my A game. So I think there's like a general aversion to playing your A game while you're tilted. Like to try to play your A game while you're forcing volume is very difficult. But once you've proven that you can force volume, it becomes easier to come back and be like, okay, that wasn't so bad. I proved to myself that I can sort of endure my B minus game for 100 hours a month. Now let's optimize that and try to play more of my A game through the same like intensity that I approached that month with. So in a way, a volume goal can be the best way to deal with a general lack of consistency, even at the expense of win rate. It's not a long-term solution, but it's a temporary solution for a problem that will obstacle you from being a winning pro. Because if you don't put the volume in, you're just not going to get the results. What's up, guys in the chat? And for the record, I would argue that like the mental game leak in terms of the collective, the community, is so much more prevalent than people actually understand. Like, the amount that we have understood in terms of theory is substantial over the last 2 years. And when I think about like what we have left to gain from theory in terms of like things that can actually be implemented practically, like the gap that we still need to close on the whole theory paradigm is nothing compared to the mental game leaps that are ahead of us in terms of thinking more clearly, identifying the most relevant data points to make exploitative pure strategy decisions where mixed strategies were otherwise the norm. All that stuff is where I see like huge advancements waiting for us in the industry. And I think a lot of it hinges on being able to understand how to detect imbalances through mass database work in a way that's empirically focused, and no longer just like speculation or assumption. At some point, I'm going to reorganize the Skype groups on Poker Detox so that, and this was Tim's idea actually. He said that the shit's really unorganized, and it is right now. Like it's just a scroll of pages where people have created accounts, and you search through for someone who you want to work with. But what if it was more organized in the sense of like MTT guys, cash game guys, PO solver guys, heads up guys, guys who just want to study mental game, like all these different categories where you can post, and just adding a little bit more format to it, I think could make it a lot more user friendly. So it's something that's sort of in the works. By the way, I want to thank everybody who gave feedback on the recent posts I've made in the blog exposing the first glimpse at the night vision database analysis pack. You guys have been really helpful already in kind of redirecting us for optimizing the types of features that we want to include in it. And rest assured, the Detox team is hard at work behind the scenes at going even deeper into what the potential is for this type of thing. I'm not going to say exactly what's happened in the past week, even since we posted that, but it's way cooler than I think we ever expected that it could be. And I'm interested to see how it pans out. It has to do with hand to note and the capacity of the program, and what it's going to allow us to offer to you guys. This guy says, so what exactly are your mental problems? Mental stamina to play long hours. So that kind of touches on the main area that I was sort of focusing on. I think it's probably one of the biggest issues for long-term pros is like mental stamina getting in the way of actually showing up to work. There's a rationalization that takes place there too, and that's the thing that I think really needs to be pointed out is like if you're someone who really focuses a lot and puts a lot of value in playing your A game, you'll continue to rationalize that it's okay not to show up to work because you don't think you can play your A game in that moment. And then that turns into a self-fulfilling prophecy. I can't play my A game, so I won't show up to work, and that's okay. But at some point, it's no longer okay because you're not putting the volume in. So there's a fine line between beginning to become sensitive to when you're actually going through an integration phase where it's cool to take time off, and when that's becoming a phase of avoidance. I think usually that happens like around the 2 week mark, where if you haven't played in 2 weeks, you need to start to really ask good questions as to whether or not you're actively avoiding something or still getting shit together in your head in terms of like how you're going to optimize your playing state. So just to become aware of that more, like that the reasoning or rationale that I don't want to play when I'm not playing my E game can quickly turn into an excuse, and that can sabotage you even more than playing your B minus game. Because at the end of the day, a lot of you guys have enough win rate at your current limit that your B minus game is still winning. So from a perspective of putting up results for the month, it could very well be more reasonable to play your B minus game for 75 hours, prove to yourself in the process that you're not going to be stopped just because your state isn't perfect. Bank a few grand so that you actually can make your expenses for the month, and also gain the conviction that you are a grinder who won't be derailed by mental issues, and then go back and optimize that in the next month. So that's cool. Guys are responding, exchanging the old Skype. I've never been in a mental game group exclusively, but I feel like it'd be really cool. I think what would make this group super effective is if everyone came with the disclaimer that a high level of personal honesty and humility is required. And by humility, I just mean that, like, no one in the group is concerned with looking good in front of the others. Like, this group is set up so that we can ruin each other openly and feel comfortable about it. That's how I think you get a lot of progress in something like this. Because if you end up with a group of 5 or 6 guys, and two of the guys are sort of like taking the imbalanced leadership role of being like, okay, yeah, well, you need to do this, 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 and this, and sort of like pointing out everybody else's mistakes without being honest about what they go through, that's not really as functional as like 4 or 5 guys on the same level who are open about not being perfect at all and actually going through the journey together. So it's a weird balance. Um, and while I do think it could be helpful to like assign a leader, if you're not careful, if that leader isn't coming from a really, really high level of empathy and humility, um, he's gonna stand to trigger the other members in the group by having them seem like he's talking down to them, or reprimanding them in a weird way, and then you won't get results because people will become defensive, and there won't be that connection that's necessary for guys to speak openly about the things that they're actually truthfully going through. Because people will be like, there'll be a conflict of interest. People won't want to put their heart on their sleeve because they're afraid of getting shot down. That's a lot of what happens in the forums, to be honest. Like, you see guys who are posting in forums who have a defensive nature about them naturally because of what's happened over the course of the years with forums, where people come in and they shoot down anyone who appears to be insecure about a certain line. Um, that's not a healthy state for a question answer format. As long as the questioner isn't comfortable with asking a question, he'll never present it in a way that can receive the best answer, because he'll have some sort of defensive distortion going on in his question, um, that doesn't allow him to get his point across clearly, or um, yeah, I think that would be the main thing. It doesn't allow him to be clear in his approach, and then he'll get an answer that's equally as distorted, or he'll attract the guy who preys on weak-minded people, um, and tries to shoot him down for asking a vulnerable type of question. Good job, Seven. I think that's healthy too. I started using a lot more smileys in the last year. I used to think it was corny, but once I started to realize that the way that my tone comes off is pretty blunt, I think the smiley is a nice balance for just showing people at the end of the sentence that, like, hey, I'm actually saying this from a place that's very content already, and I'm not trying to force anything on you, and my advice comes from a loving place. That's what the smiley represents to me. It's like from love, signing off. This got a lot of play. Gay theory coming out. I wonder if he got added to the group. This is probably instrumental in the guy that was pirating all of my packs went through the Run At Once forum and compiled every single Skype name that's ever been posted on the forum, and then started PMing everyone privately trying to sell them bootleg copies of my shit. So I guess this is where he got them all from. He was using my Skype forums against me, because everybody who joined my Skype pages, those are like prime candidates for guys who might potentially buy my pack. But I do want to say I've been impressed and grateful for all the messages that I got personally that showed me screenshots of this guy offering them the pack at like 10% of the price, and guys who are responding from integrity and basically telling him to fuck off. Um, it's really raised my awareness over the fact that people are capable of responding from integrity, and whatever your definition of that is. I think mine is just, you don't need to manipulate anyone to get what you want. Seven, you were one of those guys who did that, so props to you, bro. There was like 10 guys, I think, just from the Run At Once forums alone that messaged me about it, and it was really cool to see. Stressing over a downswing. How to bounce back. That one kind of jumps out at me for some reason. I've recently experienced a lot of stress over poker. Can't really figure it out on my own, so I'm asking for help. My game is 6 max, no limit. Me too. I started out this year very confident with high expectations. I did a decent amount of off-table work. There's times where I skip over paragraphs because I don't think the context is necessary to get to the value of the question. Um, it's not that I'm like uninterested. I'm just prioritizing. I'm here now. Somewhere along the way, everything falls apart. I get completely killed in pretty much every game I play on in any site or lineup. I'm constantly bleeding money and can't seem to book winning sessions. Started to lose confidence. Decreased my amount of hours. Went on a 40k downer. First losing year. Goes on vacay, comes back, drops limits, takes some shots. So I'm stuck somewhere around 60k in poker is literally a nightmare. I still work a decent amount on my game. Been messing around with solvers both pre and post flop and can't really find what mistakes I'm doing. Been taking some coaching lessons, etc., trying to work on the mental game. I literally have zero confidence left in my game. It kind of bothers my mood a lot in real life as well because every day pretty much ends up with me dropping a couple thousand. That sucks. Been there. I seriously have no clue what I'm doing at the tables. I feel like I'm never going to win again, which is kind of weird when I look at stats and solvers and whatnot. I still think stats and solvers and whatnot. I still think a lot of regs that are doing better than me in the same games play like shit. Wow. Graph coming. Okay. The most problems that I see consistently happening are to guys who play through a regression by forcing volume. And I know this almost contradicts what I just said about not putting volume in from your A game, but assuming that you've conquered the problem of being able to sit down and grind, the next problem is how can you not how can you just completely stop playing from your C game? I think a lot of it is just training. Like the mental game side of the training is to clarify that when you're playing from your C game, you're not actually benefiting yourself. There's a lot of versions of this, trending from self-sabotage to just total victimization. Self-sabotage being like, okay, fuck it, let's just punt these buy-ins to these fuckers because they run well anyway. Show me the nuts, like that thing that I was trolling Brian for the other day. Victimization just being the general lack of confidence that he's outlining after you've been on a 40 buy-in downer or whatever. Um, it starts to feel like you can't trust your own judgment because the confirmation bias has devastated you to the point where you're questioning everything. So in a way, poker is a very interesting industry because regardless of how good you are at your peak, a lot of guys can get thrown by a 40 buy-in downswing in a way that sends them into such a weird, distorted, um, I guess you would call like chapter of their life. Like you can go on a 1 year regression after a 40 buy-in downswing because it throws your perception so much that it shifts your trajectories towards something completely irrelevant in the direction of I'm not sure anymore. Basically, lack of self-trust, which is why I'm so um, I'm so crazy about making sure that the trust is good because once you lose the trust or the confidence, I guess you could say, you're so susceptible to heading into a direction that actually perpetuates the downswing. Um, in other words, lack of confidence will find a way to confirm data points in its environment that make it appear as if there's benefit in this direction, but really that's the direction that reinforces the downswing. That's the direction that reinforces the overanalysis or the searching for proof, which actually reinforces the core belief system that I don't know yet. I'm not confident. I don't trust myself. I can't just pick something that feels right and work with it. So what you end up getting is this new distorted inner kingdom caused by a lack of self-trust that forces you to look at everything that you see and question it. That's a really dangerous place to start to get into because it's a downward spiral. And it's something that I went through for years in my 20s before I actually understood what it was. And it's very, very annoying. Like he's saying, like the frustration that he's feeling is on account of believing that other regs are not doing anything all that special, but that he can't identify what he's doing. It's because you're coming from a heavy energetic distortion. Um, Guys who don't understand this yet, this is something that will become more widely understood through like new science and shit like that when it becomes more provable, so people accept it more. But in the meantime, you can start to confirm this through direct experience by being an independent learner, that the frequency of your thoughts and emotions actually dictates the quality or accuracy of your thought patterns. The only way that you can really prove this to yourself is to put in a long sample of making self trust the most important thing in your life, prioritizing it, and actually saying, regardless of what, like, it's almost like you push objective research to the side and say, none of that has helped me. This is the journey I went through, at least, where, like, none of the theory analysis gave me anything in terms of results, like, long term. In fact, it just spun me out more and more into complexity that didn't actually produce anything of substance. So finally, what I said was, fuck it. I'm completely punting the entire model, and I'm starting from a place that stacks on something that feels good. I'm going to look for the next most resonant perspective or the next most resonant data point, and if it feels good, like all my intuition, every bone in my body that has ever felt true, I'm going to put into looking at this thing and identifying what feels like I should pay attention to it. And then from there, you start to assemble a new paradigm for yourself that's built on self trust. There's no way to prove this to someone who comes from an over analytical paradigm. That's why the biggest it's like the biggest misunderstanding to this day in the educational process is like we're focused on teaching people how to become very very good at seeking objectively, but to a point everything that you seem to think is objective is actually distorted if you come from a distorted subjective imbalance. So when I say it will be understood in science what this is, it goes back to one of the main scientific endpoints right now, which is that the observer is permanently biased. That's something that's being more understood um, in physics and stuff like that. And there's been experiments like that sort of support that. One of them being like um, the double slip experiment, where when the observer watches the experiment, it has a different result than when the observer doesn't watch it. So stuff like that I think is really revolutionary in understanding consciousness. But to make it more relevant to your direct experience, you have to put in a sample where you break the pattern of everything that you're doing and where you're putting your focus, so that you can actually compare it to something else. Like it's never going to make sense until you have two versions of your life to compare to. And I think that's the main difference that I have between even a year ago, like the last year of my life, the acceleration that I've experienced and the clarity that I've gained through doing it my way in a way that felt resonant and watching the data points come in a more balanced fashion that stacked onto themselves, higher and higher relevance, higher and higher accuracy, things just slingshotting into more and more advanced understandings. All of that has come from making the initial decision to punt the model and do it my way, do it in a way that felt good immediately, do it in a way that stopped overanalyzing. So if you don't have that, if you don't put in a sample, you're going to be in the camp, the forum camp, basically, where there's so many forum experts, but none of them have produced anything of substance because all of them are too afraid to go off and try something new and then speak about something that can't really be understood conceptually. Like where I'm speaking from right now, I know won't connect with 90% of you, but there will be 10% of you who understand that the nugget from this is that you need to go try something experientially that resonates with you and create your own journey and your own understanding out of that in a way that sort of spirals upward into higher and higher relevance, higher inspiration, higher clarity, and actually higher accuracy in how you perceive your environment. And I think that's the biggest thing, is that nothing in terms of what I'm doing was any sort of revolutionary shit. Like I don't think I've done anything genius level at all in terms of like the advancements I've made with simplifying the game, simplifying mixed strategies to pure strategies, becoming more exploitative and accurate. All I've actually done is stop asserting myself in the way that I thought was intelligent through overanalysis, basically what theory taught me to do. I stopped doing all that, and instead I became available to the indicators from my environment. So what really happened was I became more available to seeing how my environment was actually operating, and from that availability it became clear that I should be doing this instead of this. What becomes clear is where the true incentives are. The true incentive is not to play the mixed strategy when the pure strategy is higher EV, and you can prove that if you become available to seeing where the environmental imbalances are. So when I say optimize strategies for life and poker is the slogan, it's because I've realized that the very problems that I've solved in poker are so translatable to real life, because life is all about identifying where the imbalances are in the environment and then taking the most incentivized action. It's a little bit different because you're not like exploiting your reality, but you're responding to it in a way that gets shit done because you don't waste time on things that are redundant. What this guy's going through is futility. The futility of being off in a distortional tunnel that confirms the initial imbalance that it perceives from. That thing that I just said about the scientist will always confirm the initial imbalance of his perception. The scientist is always permanently biased. It's because the root of the problem, the root of the perception, is not being challenged for the distortion that it actually is. And this is why I said in the last question that the key to mental game groups working is that all members of it are completely open to sharing what the root of their psyche is. Like, what is at the root of why I think I need to play in this way or perceive the situation this way? And if you can expose yourself completely honestly without feeling vulnerable or without fear of vulnerability, that's when there's a high availability to change. And that's why I really like working with guys with a lot of ambition. I've said I'd rather take the really small stakes player, like the 25 NL player who's got a ton of humility, over the 200 NL player who's stuck in his ways, because the 25 NL player is more personally honest. And I'll find out more about what makes him tick in a way that I can actually shift because he's available to change. Whereas most people would rather just state their paradigm, reinforce it, and then become defensive when there's anything that challenges that. Questions in the chat? Yeah, Seven is saying about this post, that's when you leave the game for a while. He said he did that. Let's read that part. He said he went on vacation. This part's interesting. I've been talking with friends a lot about my situation, and most of them are like, yeah, it's variance, it sucks, you'll bounce back, you're playing well, you shouldn't worry, I still think you're a tough opponent, blah, blah, blah. It's usually bullshit. Like, that's the funhouse theory that I explained earlier, where like the easiest thing to do in something like poker, where there is variance and it's really hard to determine like where you're actually playing poorly when everything can be justified as a mixed strategy. Not everything, but you get the drift. The easiest thing to do is to rationalize that everything is still okay. That's a cowardly approach. It doesn't demand anything of you to not, like, it's the same thing. It's a level of personal honesty. Even if everything's okay, I approach my life as if there is something quote unquote wrong. Not in a way that has me paranoid, but in a way that has me like permanently interested in achieving a higher level of balance within myself. Like, I firmly believe that where I'm at a year from now will blow this lecture out of the water. But the reason that I believe that to be so true is because I know I'll keep hunting for the next little gem that polishes my balance to the next platform or the next paradigm. If I become complacent, which is what this is, like, yo, you'll just bounce back, bro. Like, you're not doing anything wrong. That's the fastest way to reinforce a paradigm that's already imbalanced. So I'm very aware, because I've gone through futility, of the trap of convincing yourself everything's okay. And so the way that I've sort of worked around that, having like sort of come out of that quite quickly in the last year, is like I approach my life in a way where like everything is okay, but nothing's okay at the same time. So you're simultaneously holding that double paradigm that like shit's okay because I come from a high level of self-forgiveness and I don't judge myself anymore because I know that sabotages me, but I'm very interested in improving, and for that reason things are not okay. Things are on the up and up, and I need to find where my current biases are so I can expose them and gain greater freedom. You have to understand that the result of balancing your perspectives is greater internal freedom, greater clarity, greater accuracy, greater decisiveness, higher levels of inspiration, and a cleaner focus on what you actually want to do with your life. So, in the diversification part of the mental game pack, I talked a little bit about how, like, a lot of you guys don't even know what you want to do after poker yet, and some of you guys will stay with poker, but before you can even have an idea of what's ahead of you, you have to sort of get on board with the fact that becoming a better problem solver is what prepares you to launch into your life, because that's a skill that's highly translatable. Um, so like as of right now, I've said on previous streams that like my goal is to bring the community to a critical mass where people can think independently, and I feel like everyone is more or less out of the GTO trap, where like GTO is no longer the norm. Mass database analysis research becomes the norm. At that point, I'll be like, okay, I feel like my inspiration has sort of peaked in poker. I've accomplished what I set out to do, and I'll move on, but with the confidence that my problem solving skills are not just pinned to poker. Poker just happened to be the platform that I understood myself through in my late 20s when I broke out of futility. Um, so, what I would love for you guys, whether or not you stay in poker or not, like whether or not you believe that's your future right now or not, is to be open to the fact that what you learn through this industry is so translatable into other fields, especially if you're into like independent entrepreneurial type stuff, because what you're learning is how to handle problems. What you're learning is how to look at something in an unbiased way and develop or move toward a solution. And that's something that every industry needs. So, just a little, I guess, just a little inspiration in terms of like guys who are searching for greater purpose through poker and don't know exactly if it's for them for their entire career. Allow me to be an example to you that I had no idea that I would even be here 6 months ago. But now standing here, I know that what I'm doing in this direction is actually something that I can continue to do in a completely different context, because it's all about the self trust in being able to perceive the environment and react accordingly. Like, it's a lot of what like market understanding the market is. That new video that I just uploaded about almost being like a poker visionary, in the sense that, yeah, maybe this shit is not a long-term sustainable strategy, all these high exploitative strategies that I'm advocating, but do you want to be the guy that actually takes advantage of that while it's still incentivized and then makes the money in the meantime, and then 6 months from now when the market dries up in that direction, you can put your attention on the next most visionary thing? Like, people who need the proof that the market is going to be stable in this direction for a long period of time never actually make the buck, because the market is developing. Like, there is no long-term sustainable strategy, at least not one that I'm interested in, because I don't think it'll ever win at a high clip. I don't think it'll ever be the most incentivized. It's the risk that causes the paranoia, the illusion that something could be risked because we could be vulnerable in going against the grain. That's really the weak-minded approach. This stuff is honestly worth 500 an hour. Thank you, bro. Um, Here's something interesting. I was not going to mention this because I'm still trying to figure it out, but my goal is to be like really transparent with the scaling of the website. So I had a guy refund the pack recently, PO Pack 1, and I was glad he attached an extra paragraph, because I always say no questions asked refund. And he said, the reason I'm refunding this pack is because I've watched every single one of your streams, and I honestly feel like you've revealed most of PO Pack 1 in your free streams. Now, it's the first time someone's refunded and said that, and I started to think about it. I was like, oh wow, like PO Pack 1 is so technical in nature that the October streams probably did a nice job of, sort of demonstrating the core strategy behind it. There's a lot of stuff in Pack 2 that I think I still haven't talked about on the streams. But it's the first time where I was like, oh, okay, so PO Pack 1 has been devalued by me giving 40 or 50 hours of free streams. And at first I was like, shit, should I be more conservative about what I give away? But like very quickly that seemed to be not the right approach. Like if I start to put a stranglehold on the information that I release in order to try to keep my first premier pack up in sales, that feels like a stagnated approach. So initially, the core fear is like, oh, my product might not sell as well in the future because I'm giving away so much free shit. But like to scale the vision even further, it's like there are future products coming out that are going to be more relevant for guys in the future. And on the other hand, I feel like since I have a vision, like this is the main thing. If I didn't have a vision of what my end game was, and my end game, like I said, is to bring the community to a critical mass where people become independent and no longer view GTO or game theory as like the blueprint that we operate from. They'll view mass database research as the new norm. Since that's the end game, and since I see so much value in that from a collective perspective, that has to trump any sort of personal interest I have in trying to make the most money through keeping my packs, like sell at a good selling point, like keeping my packs exclusive. Like, yeah, I think what will be the trend is that the pack from 6 months ago always gets phased out in the next 6 months as I reveal more of that baseline foundational strategy through the streams, which is basically what happened. Like the P Unlock pack was sort of the intro of this entire revolution. Like, here's the main simplified strategies that you should be using, and if you want to learn how to use PO Solver, here it is. And then what that sort of scaled into through the Twitch streams is me sort of demonstrating that at the table. And then whoever watches the 30 hours of streams sort of gets a lot of the PO Unlocked pack for free. So one of the reasons I don't think there's a problem with it is because that's already a guy with a shitload of ambition. And then the bottom tag of his note is like, I really am going to be excited about potentially buying future packs because that guy's actually a real follower. Like the only reason that guy didn't get the value out of PO Pack 1 is because that guy had the fucking balls to show up and put 30 or 40 hours into watching the streams. So I almost say like props to that because you're using the tools that are available, you're distinguishing what's of highest value for you, you're responding to the environment that you're in, and you're still operating from enough integrity to be like, okay, I appreciate this, but it's no longer relevant. And then for me, I have to look at that and be like, oh wow, I'm learning something from this. I'm learning that my products might not have as much longevity as I thought if I actually want to get to my end game as fast as possible. So it was an interesting moment for me where I had to sort of clarify my intent. Like, okay, I could stop giving as much away for free, but the overall goal is to get the community to the critical mass at as fast of a rate as possible. And there are, like this, from a business perspective, there are also massive implies for me in doing that. Like, if I succeed in revolutionizing the coaching industry, it's not going to matter if PO Pack 1 still has good sales. There'll be so much opportunity for me to springboard off of that it won't even become relevant anymore. So it goes back to the same type of thing that people always say of like, oh, we should hide information. The very people that think hiding information is intelligent are the people that don't have enough vision to see that if everything is out in the open and you're the one that facilitates it, that's a springboard into you having a lot of leverage in the future as a person who facilitates information. So I was really happy. It's the refund that I was most happy about because he was honest enough to say why he did it, and it triggered an introspective part of me to be like, okay, how does this pan out now? Like, do I sort of shell up against this and sort of go defensive? I think that's what it was. It was a moment where I decided I can either go defensive and be careful about what I expose and take some of the streams off YouTube that I feel like devalued the PO1 pack, or I can go the complete opposite direction, offensive, and just pour out more shit for free. The guys who watch it won't buy PO Unlocked, or they'll refund it because they realize that most of the value I'm giving away is free now from that pack, and I can scale into bigger and bigger packs. I like everything you said there, Seven. What do you believe is vital to your success? Your arrogance exceeds your ability. I get you. Seek out dealing with self shaming. Yeah. Be receptive to your sources is like one of the biggest ones. But in order to do that in a way that's empowered, you have to get out of like the question asking mode and get into the sensing into what's true, which is a really hard thing to tell someone who comes from a disempowered paradigm because like the first thing that you do when you join Run At Once is like you gravitate toward the posts that coaches are making. But if you're not confident enough to create a context out of all of the different information that's being delivered onto a platform like Run At Once, you stand to go into information overload mode. So that was one of the things that I was very interested in when I saw an angle to develop a new private training site. Because, like I said, I'll never do what Run At Once does. They're unique in this in the sense that they're a platform for content. But where I think I can improve on that model is by creating a more private context. So the thing that a platform with hundreds of coaches will never be able to do, I don't know if they even have 100, but you get what I mean. What they'll never be able to do is create a really uniform context around a training program. And I feel like the one thing that has lacked in that site, even though they've done massive amounts for the community just by being able to offer that much content, is they have not been able to synthesize the content in a way that offers a deliberate context for the player to say, okay, from point A to point Z, I'm taking these 20 steps. Because it's not like that. It's like more of a zigzag, and you can go over here and say, spend time with this coach, and then Sauce puts a new video out, and it completely flips everything on its head, and then you have 4 or 5 guys that you're following. They don't always coincide in terms of the information that they're offering. All of their information usually makes sense from the paradigm they're operating from, but that's the problem, is communicating with all these different people who are at different stages in their program. And I think the way that I started to understand this more, that this was what the community wanted, was most of my PMs for coaching were followed up with a paragraph that said, I just don't feel like I have a proper direction for where I want to go. Like, I feel like if someone told me what to do and I trusted it, I could do it. And that's when I started to realize that, like, there are a lot of guys with real ambition out there who were in a similar position that I was in, where they don't trust themselves enough to just go and try an independent learning process, but they really do want to show up and learn. So it got me thinking, like, okay, there is a market for this. Things aren't synthesized enough because guys can't create a direction out of the information overload. So what I was interested in was doing something that was more streamlined and simplified. And I think that that's why my angle of training, I think, is just different. I don't even want to say better, because it's just like it speaks to a more ambitious player. It speaks to the guy who's like, hey, I'm fed up with like acting like I want to be all in, and I'm actually all in. Now give me the program. Like, that's my market. The guy who's like, fucking give me it and I'll do the work. It's not the guy who's still like perusing for the best angle. But that's how I set it up. I wanted to deal only with the most ambitious. And so when I thought about like the Poker Detox mental game pack in the release of it, I was like, okay, how do I scale this into something that speaks to the masses but serves as a funnel to the most ambitious guys? And that's why I got the idea to make it the eligibility course to one-on-one coaching, which will start up back in January. It's like, here's the pack that you need to be on board with. Like, here's your research on me. Buy this pack. Make sure you're on board with the way that I train, or go watch my Twitch stuff and get as much free value as you want. But this is your committance point to me, is that I don't want to deal with guys who still are unsure about the fact that I'm speaking from truth. And the problem with just opening up to tons of coaching with no prerequisite program is that now I stand to walk into lessons with new guys who would rather sit there and reinforce their own paradigm and like basically be skeptical of me rather than actually show up to work. And don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with healthy skepticism. Like I just put a new wave of ads out on Facebook, and there's like two or three posts from the same guy who just keeps like flaming them, like, "What are your credentials? And what have you done in poker that should make me coach for you, or that should make me pick you as a coach?" But like the more and more I deal with that type of pressure and doubt from other people, the more and more that I'm growing, the more and more I know I'm growing, because like that shit really doesn't phase me anymore. And I think it's because I've built an ecosystem where like I'm so focused, and I know, like, I trust so deeply that what I'm doing is actually beneficial, that I just don't have time for like trying to convince people who don't already smell the truth of it. So in a way, I sort of like being really underrated. Like I, all arrogance aside, from a very objective standpoint, I very much see myself as one of the top three most underrated players in all of poker right now. And not just like players, but like one of the most underrated minds in poker for what I'm trying to do with this vision of scaling into making everyone more independent by offering a system that actually works. So in my world, like when I get the doubt that comes in or the skepticism, it's like I'm already clarified on that. I don't need, like, my marketer showed me that response from that guy, and he's like, "Hey, what do you want to say to this guy? He keeps flaming your posts." And I said, "I almost don't feel like I could say anything that didn't feel like I'm compensating for something I don't feel like I need to compensate for. Like I know it deserves a response, but I'm not going to be the guy that jumps in and be like, 'Oh, hey, look at my results here, here, and here.'" Because I mean that stuff is on the site if you want to see it, and more than that, like it takes away from my focus. And I would never have understood this if I didn't actually come to a place where I really trusted myself in the last 6 months, because that's where I derive all the value from now. And when I, going back to what I said about the students who come in new and they would rather be skeptical still, I don't have time for someone who doesn't already get it. That's why I'm putting out all the free content. It's like this is here for you to get on board with it or decide that I'm not for you. But don't show up to a lesson and waste both of our time. So the PDMG pack was sort of a way to help people clarify that. Like, this is your entry ticket to something that I know is really beneficial. And if you show up with the ambition for it and the humility to actually be receptive, we're going to do great work together. And I think most of my packs will offer some sort of incentive like that in the future. The more I see that the Twitch is devaluing the pricing, so of something like the PO Unlocked pack, for instance, the more I see that it needs to be more personal in order for people to still have incentive to pay for products. So I need to do one-on-one coaching. I need to go in and offer the possibility of dismantling one person's paradigm for them so they can get more personal training than just watching the 30-second exercise on Run It Once. All that stuff is like a funnel into a a place where you can get much more detailed coaching if you're the type of guy who wants it. So everything ends up being about who's the most ambitious, like in my world. Like I'm always going to offer the pinnacle product to the guy who is the most ambitious. And that's the way I think it should be, because that is the natural pre-selection of it. Nick, about those paradigms, before you came in with this approach, have you studied in the past hands of six max, let's say on the button Red Baron, for example? Do you think it's counterproductive as you operate from a vastly different context, or is it still worth getting some ideas? Okay, so I was thinking about this yesterday. Like, I think the things that I'm advocating could be so quickly overturned by nosebleed players who play much more well balanced. But the reason that I'm not like interested in competing with them on a level of like okay, say the top three nosebleed players in the world come in and say this approach of mass database analysis is hugely irrelevant because it's not going to be worth anything beyond 1020 because the environments play much more balanced. Maybe that has some merit, but I'm clarified in what my demographic is. Like, I'm not going to be the nosebleed guy. I'm already surrendered to the fact that that doesn't inspire me. I'm out of poker probably within the next 2 years. I have no interest in sitting around and bum hunting like 2550 and 50 and waiting for action. I'm interested in taking the 98% of people who are struggling from getting from small stakes to 5, 10 no limit and scaling them upward as fast as possible. And I also think there's a huge market for that too. So it's it's a good point what you said, that like with regard to this paradigm stuff, what's relevant for a nosebleed player is completely different for what's relevant to me, and for what I'm doing for scaling people from small stakes to high stakes. Scaling someone from high stakes to nosebleeds is probably a completely different process, because it's more of a process of, I would guess, getting more balanced. Like assuming that nosebleeds plays better, and by better I mean more well balanced, the only progression from high stakes to nosebleeds would be one from exploitative toward closer and closer to equilibrium. That's not the case from small stakes to high stakes. The imbalances are great enough in the environments that highly exploitative strategies are very incentivized. So it depends where you look from. Again, the people that say something like, oh, well, these strategies won't be sustainable once we get to 1020. How about you get to 1020 first, bro, and then decide if poker's even what you want to continue with, or if you're happy making 500,000 a year just from playing 1020, 4 hours a day or something. It's possible to get to that level, and then let's talk about it then. You see these guys that want the long-term pinnacle strategy for no limit that plants them never having to recalibrate at any point in their career and making all this money. But like, let's actually take it step by step and see what's relevant. Like, you have to get to 1020 before you can set your sights on 2550. The guys that don't understand that the game is going to change. And I think this is why GTO was such a craze. It was like, it was sold or pitched as this holy grail where you could learn GTO and never have to adapt to your environment past that point. That's very attractive as someone who comes from an overly defensive paradigm, who just wants the one size fits all invulnerable approach to poker. But it will never be the most incentivized approach, at least not coming up from small stakes to high stakes. And it actually doesn't do much for the independence of your vision as a learner, as a thinker, because it almost dumbs you down. Like, it dulls your thinking to the point where you don't have vision over your environment, so you're no longer making inferences based on feedback that you're getting. And once that happens, you become a very distorted, contracted thinker, because you're literally shelled off, like in a bunker, only confirming the thoughts that you've been fed through books or theory forums. It's very hard for new information to penetrate you when you're sort of set in your ways on how you're going to handle your strategy. Um, it's really like it's the definition almost of being like antisocial. Like the guy who just completely thinks that he has it figured out. Everybody else is weird. I'm not weird. I'm not the awkward one. They're awkward. When really you're just not socialized well. So it's kind of like that in terms of getting familiar with the environment is the definition of becoming a more balanced person, because you're actually including the other part of you, like the other half of the situation. It's not just you. You are part of the environment. Now use the environment to your advantage so you can identify where the most incentivized strategy is. I'm not meditating at this moment, no. But I did say I've been doing more meditations lately and enjoying them quite a bit. I don't have, there's a quote here, message in the chat, that I seem to have things clear in my mind, like I've been living in a mountain meditating for 220 years. It's actually quite the opposite. I just did a lot of shit in my 20s and failed miserably. And from that, I have, I think, more perspective than most people do. So I think it's a good shift in how you see me, because if you think I'm just developing all of this shit by meditating and theorizing on it, that's wildly assumptive. What I'm speaking from is direct experience, and it was my main problem in my early and middle 20s, that I thought that was the answer. I thought it was about, being in the forums and assimilating all of the theory information and making sure that this was going to work before I deployed and implemented it. But once you actually throw all that aside and just jump right in, and face the fear of being vulnerable in the environment, what you begin to discover is that you know the environment now more than you used to. You actually see what's real in the environment, what fears were false. Like this idea that everybody's going to exploit me if I take a highly exploitative strategy. That's a good example of that. And what starts to emerge is a greater degree of confidence and clarity based on actually exposing what is a threat and what's not, and where there are opportunities and where there aren't, because you become directly interactive with the incentives. Unless you make yourself available to the full incentive of the environment, you will never know what the most incentivized approach actually is. Most guys are not available to that because the theory shell has you contracted and sealed off. It's a very, very limited part of reality. George, Nick, how did you create your website? You hired coders? I hired guys from a site called Upwork.com. It's basically a site where you can hire freelancers at competitive rates, and you post basically what you're looking for, and what your main idea is and what your vision is, and then you hire someone based on their portfolio, and you sort of just work with them through private message from there. So I hired a couple of guys from Bosnia, like younger guys, um, and then I hired a marketer to help me with like the Facebook side of stuff, all from that site. So I would recommend it. I've had a good experience with it. And everybody on there has like their reviews posted, so you can get good feedback on the guys that you're hiring, and also leave them feedback. So to this guy, I would say you have my infinite empathy. I'm sorry that you're going through futility, but the only way out of it is to come to a critical point where you're ready to punt your allegiance to everything that you think is currently true about how you should be going about improving. Because here's the thing, it offers you no benefit to keep reinforcing that it's just variance. Like, especially since you've put in a decent sample to be overwhelmingly in favor of it not being just variance, you should start doing something radically different that attempts to prove yourself wrong in a way that's excited about doing it. The best way to do that is to sit, maybe meditate with yourself for long enough to determine what would actually inspire me in terms of building my own learning curve. Like, what would be a learning curve that actually made me feel empowered if I could say I did it this way? I think that's what I had going for me when I started to make real change and I really punted the theory model, like back in late 2015. It was like, this is never gonna work for me if it's always about me asking the next question and getting the next piece of information fed to me. This has to be something more. This has to be more about my journey and my ability to calibrate as an independent thinker. Otherwise, it's not going to it's not going to translate to anything anyway. Like, I wanted something from an introspective point of view. I wanted something that actually parlayed itself into a higher quality existence. And I didn't see the two as separate. That's what I think was different about the way that I approached it. I was like, okay, poker is life. Somehow that's true. Every art form is a direct representation of how skilled you are at life. So, what am I not seeing in the way that I'm approaching poker that could also help me in the way that I approach life? And that's when I started to understand that it's about the perspectives that you choose to adopt that can be in more alignment, and the higher alignment of your perspective actually generates more of a resonance and more of an accuracy in your future approach. I think a lot of that has to do with the feeling state. I was interested in doing something that felt immediately good because I had enough indicators to know that when I felt good, I played my A game. And when I played my A game and then I did a hand history review on it and I still felt good, I was able to break through new thought process leaps that I wasn't aware of before. And then I would record those, rewatch them the next day, integrate them. So my baseline stepped up in terms of what I was able to teach myself. A lot of it in the early stages was just like, I'm only going to focus on what feels good. And I feel like being all in on that and stacking that frequency, like stacking that state of being, if you want to call it, was what led to my initial, it's what gave me initial traction in the process, because it actually offered some results, enough for me to be able to point and say, okay, look at this last month. I actually did some shit that seemed to have made a difference and I feel better. Okay, let's keep going with this. How is this going to scale itself into this month? From my baseline that I've raised up to, where am I going this month? And then that sort of increased exponentially. And before you knew it, I had the 5 pack offering out that I was coaching guys through. And then that scaled itself into PO Pack 1, which quickly scaled itself into PO Pack 2, which led to the site, which led to Twitch. And it's only October. Like, I only started this shit at the beginning of last year, and I had all that success at about a 1020 and all of the poker detox developments since then. So like for me, it's been almost mind blowing. Like I can't look at anyone that I know personally and be like, this person could even understand the transformation I've just went through in the last year. And that's why I'm so like gung ho about like getting this out in the open, is like I did it and I wasn't good with myself even a year ago. I was extremely tormented. I probably could have made the same post that this guy made, um, and something just shifted that I stuck with. And I really feel like it's rooted in self-trust and the ability to stack more and more resonant perspectives on top of themselves until you create a pattern of, like, it's really about choosing to create relevance out of your life. How do you look at challenge? That's the main thing. Is like, okay, I could perceive this thing negatively, or I could perceive it as me being aware that there might be something that I can change. Once I reached rock bottom, which I think happened like sometime toward the end of last year, like emotional rock bottom, it was really that point where I was like, I have nothing left to lose in terms of trying something new. That's why I speak about failure so much, like in my blogs, where I'm like, these fucking forum guys that continue to act like this is the only way to go about learning poker, and if you don't use multiple bet sizings, you're never going to be good at poker. I can smell that shit like from a mile away when you haven't actually done anything of substance and all you do is preach to weak-minded people. I made that blog post. I said you should just go fail on a deep level so you can have something experiential to work from, and so you can stop reinforcing your own arrogance out of fear of potentially leaving yourself vulnerable. Once you're completely once you're a complete failure, like once you actually have to accept, I have no energy left, all of my energy has been put in a direction that has failed me, there's a humility that just cracks open naturally there. And it has nothing to do with you learning anything. It has everything to do with you experiencing that you gave everything you had from your current paradigm and it didn't fucking work. And while you're lying there, just like dead, like I remember I was literally like paralyzed, like bedridden for a week, after coming to like rock bottom with being totally burned out from poker. And I remember feeling like, okay, this is actually a valuable experience because I can't go lower than this. I just completely failed myself. I proved to myself that I'm a failure. So what is the risk now in trying something completely new? And then I realized, wow, there really is one. There's no risk, because anything that I could try that's new would only be a step up from where I'm currently at. I think that's what's holding so many guys back, is that they still perceive more pain in potentially failing than staying in the feudal paradigm of continuing to prophesize or hypothesize, or saying that I'm gonna do it soon. Like that whole thing is an excuse for not wanting to completely fail. And what I'm saying is you should learn how to fail because it's literally the origin of success. Like failing is the genesis of success. As soon as you hit rock bottom and have that realization that like, oh, I just survived that. That's not actually that bad. Then you become humble enough to try a different approach. The arrogance is because you the arrogance occurs because you actually think your approach is best. You really believe in your own bias. When that's happening, it's very hard to allow yourself to entertain the validity of any other option. But once you completely fail, you can't even kid yourself anymore. Like you've proven to yourself that you don't actually know what the fuck you're talking about. And at that point, there's real availability because for the first time, you have no investment at all in defending your old paradigm. A powerful point to get to. You said, I'm only going to focus on what feels good. Question in the chat. What happens when you can't consciously do it and your brain auto switches to what feels like shit? Yeah, I've been there too. Um, Sometimes you can't focus on something that feels good about poker. And that's when I think like time off is really valuable. Like there's got to be some thing in your life that you could do right now that would put you in a slightly higher emotional frequency. I don't care if it's if it's going to go to a movie theater, or you go out to lunch with someone, or even if it's just to take a shot of vodka. Something that puts you in a state where you can initially make a more balanced assessment of your situation. That's what you have to find. And don't get me wrong, I use drugs like relentlessly in this process. And I tried to use them responsibly, but there was definitely times where I was abusive with them. One thing that they did give me though was a shift in perspective. So when I was in that place that you're talking about, I would do drugs. And while I knew that it was a little bit reckless, it was all I had to try to raise my state of being enough so that I could get to a place where I could be analyzing from a more balanced position again. And I would actually leverage that. I would do drugs to get into an emotional state. And I wouldn't go fucking like party when I was on them. I would be like in meditation mode on drugs and being like, okay, this is the time that I need to use very wisely because as soon as the drug wears off, my depression seeps back in and I'm not going to be able to think clearly. So, in a way, I think you can be very responsible by using certain drugs. I'm talking about stuff like LSD, ketamine. Those were my sort of tools of choice. Um, and from there, I was able to create sort of a map around. There's almost two versions of me. There was Nick when I was in a state of being that was um, heightened in terms of emotional resonance, and I thought I was thinking clearly there. Those were the times where I was more confident. And then there was depressed Nick, who really was heavily disempowered, didn't trust himself, didn't know what the direction was. And I made the decision that I was going to start living my life from the advice of my better self. So I would piece together everything I could. A lot of my day was about getting into a 1 hour period where I felt like I was in a peak emotional state. And even though that would fade away, I would make all my decisions and plot my trajectory from that path. And then I would take actions that map toward that. So I wouldn't make concessions. Like once I came down, I was like, if there's one thing I'm sure about, it's that I want to follow the advice of my best self. So I began to basically leverage from the peak emotional clarity, even though it was only maybe a half hour or hour a day that I was in that state. I began to be religious about that in a way that like that was the version of me that I wanted to align with. And I knew that if I just took the actions that mapped to the advice that I got from that version of myself, it would eventually converge. Um, so that was an interesting time for me in the sense that like for me it was drugs. Like the one thing that I would turn to when I had nothing else was drugs because it was the only thing that spiked me out of the depression. But I knew it wasn't a sustainable long-term option. So I knew that if I was going to use it, I had to use it productively by really remapping my mind while I was in those state of beings. What did you do on parties? I guess you mean like when I went to parties? Well, I lived in Vegas for most of my 20s. A bunch of my friends were really into Molly. Um, that was one drug that like is just so intense because you have really high highs and then really low lows. And it feels like you have all the recognition in the world while you're on it, but then you can't hold on to any of it when you come off, and it's so confusing that like, wow, like last night I was so cool, like everything was on point, like all my thoughts and beliefs were aligned and seemed so empowered, and now today I don't have any of it. I just feel like shit. I feel like I'm on my period almost. I do think working out is really important. Just being on this new fitness program over the last month, eating cleaner, I definitely feel a boost in emotional frequency. Like my baseline has definitely gone up. My energy has been better. My sleep pattern has been better. Um, and so that's been something that I feel like I will not make concessions on in the future. Like once you break the pattern for good and the mind realizes that like, oh, this is something that actually offers a significant amount of benefit, I feel like that's the point where you don't go back. Like sometime last year I started flossing my teeth, and now I realize every night like I don't even consider not flossing my teeth. It's not like something that is an option to me anymore. It's just embedded in my pattern. Um, so I think it's important to do stuff like that, like do something for long enough that it clicks in your mind that it works. And that's what I think is the main problem with the poker community is that there's all these theories, but no one's actually doing one thing for long enough to actually confirm that it works. In a way that's like the only real thing that I did. I just happened to stick with something for long enough and calibrate correctly through using my emotional guidance system to be able to say, oh, okay, after 6 months, here's the results. Tell me that it's variance because it's 99% not. And then when I combine that with the increase in my happiness, the increase in my ability to express myself clearly and to understand people coming from different paradigms, I realized that there was like a substantial shift in consciousness that had occurred. And then the trust built on that, the conviction built on that, confidence was a natural side effect of it. And it continues to deepen. Like, I know I'm headed into an integration phase where I need to even trust deeper into the process. One of the things I'm dealing with right now is like how to continue to approach this with such an intense level of ambition, knowing that all my shit is still really underrated, and that 8 months from now, I feel like it has a good chance to be sort of at the leading edge or the standard for the community. How to reconcile that vision and the ambition behind it with a patience that knows that it's still 8 months to a year away, and that I have to just chip away at it by keep continuing to put out content and come here and meet with you guys every day and talk about something that's widely misunderstood that I seem to see so clearly. How do I do all that without becoming frustrated? That's been sort of the thing that's developed for me lately, because as soon as your ambition is large enough, if you don't balance it with enough patience, you're going to get frustrated that you're not at the end game yet. So for me, a lot of my frustration has been in the direction of like, how the fuck is this not more widely understood yet when I see so clearly that this is the way? Like, this is the future. There's no question in my mind. It includes more data points than anyone else is using. It's more empirically driven, and it's more conceptually clear in terms of the mental game aspect of it. It's true. The problem is it's not being distributed in a way that scales well. And that's the thing. Like, that's where my focus is right now. It's like, okay, most of the focus now needs to be on creating content that reverse engineers people's anxieties about changing, so that they can get a dose of that content every day in a way that's interactive and sort of like available to them, so that I can reach more people. It's about drawing the attention toward the truth at this point, which I think is a whole nother angle of it. Um, so that's sort of like where the that's sort of where like the double challenge is right now. Even though I see how my coach might be more invested in my game if he stands to continue to share my winnings. There was two parts to that question. Okay, I'm a heads up player at mid stakes, but wanting to transition to six max. I'm not sure if I should watch six max videos to catch me up to speed on the basic ranges and strategy, or if I would be more efficient. If it would be a more efficient use of my time to pay attention to a high level coach on a profit share, to pay a high level coach on profit share. I don't want to lock myself into a coaching deal where my work and effort outpace my coach's input. Smart. There's enough information out there that you should be able to get basic ranges that work well. Most of your win rate will come from post flop. That being said, there's a good deal of advancements to be made in understanding how you should be deploying a standard exploitative blueprint into a certain environment based on the mass database research that you do on that environment. The universal trend, I can tell you, is that you should be opening wider ranges than what is suggested across forums. The scaling process of that will be how it turns into a dynamic application as certain regs at your limit start to be aware of the fact that you're more exploitative on the raise first in. And so what will naturally develop is that you'll have color codes for certain players that are more passive or unaware, and then you'll have the color codes for the regs that play back at you more, and you'll have dynamic opening ranges depending on who's behind you at the table. That's how that portion of the game scales. And it's kind of a microcosm for how you apply post-flop blueprints in the same way. Like, your goal is to exploit the bottom 75% of the pool, give or take. And that happens at the expense of taking more attention away from the top 25% of regs. Is the biggest misperception that guys have, and it's that video that I just posted on my blog the other day, that like, you have to get over the fact that you might not be considered the best player at your limit, but you might be the biggest winner still, because all the money is in the bottom 75% of the pool. And if that's where your focus is, and then you just sort of worry about playing generally solid versus the other 25% of best regs, I see that as the most intelligent blueprint because it's what's most incentivized. So if you're asking me if it would be a good fit for one of my programs, um, I think simplified strategies are highly beneficial to sort of guys coming in and looking for a way to simplify the game tree in six max. Um, Generally, here I'd just say try it. Like that's why I made it fully refundable. Is that so? If you don't feel like you got good value out of it, it's just totally okay. You can give the program back. Like I'm only trying to draw a community of guys who feel like they're getting good value from packs. Like if you don't feel like you got value off pack one, I don't want you to buy pack two because it's not for you, and that's okay. So like I don't know how to answer the question really. Is like is this for me? Um, I feel like if you feel like my content resonates with you, then all my packs are for you in a way. Um, but I just don't know. I really don't know. I have to think more about how to answer that question in a way that is more personal because as of right now, I just see it as like, like it's apparently for 85% of guys who buy it because I think that's what the refund rate is about right now. I think it's at like 15% or so. Um, and then like some guys are just stealing it and returning it. Some guys are actually honest about saying, I'm not ready to make this type of shift in my strategy. Um, some guys, like the recent one, was like, oh, I don't think I got a lot of value off of it because I've been following so much of your other content that I feel like it devalued the PO pack. That's a good point. Um, so I don't really know how to give you an answer that fits you because I think it kind of falls in line with what I've been saying all along. Like you just have to do something, and why not do it if it's free to begin with? The amount of guys that can't pull a trigger on a refundable pack is like crazy to me. And I'm not saying this is you because I get your question is completely valid, but at the point at which I give you that answer, that's like I really don't know how to tell you if it's for you because it just hits a different audience. You have to be ambitious enough to begin with. You have to be in tune with simplified strategies. Um, you have to want to scale into database research. If all of that sounds like something you're interested in, I can't see how it wouldn't be for you. But I will say where the PO pack fell short in a way was to push strategies on guys that made the pack less versatile. Um, and by that I mean that the one-third sizing strategy, which was the core of the simplified function, was the one thing that made it kind of intrusive on players. Because if you wanted to upgrade to pack 2, you had to already be sort of on board with the pack 1 strategies, which were to simplify to one-third strategies in single one-third c-bet strategies in single raise pots and 3-bet pots. That's what allows you to reduce your strategic options. So guys who sort of were taken aback at that because it is a radical strategy shift for a lot of guys, um, some of those guys were the ones that refunded saying, I'm just not ready for this transition yet, even though I get where you're coming from, Nick. And so that was sort of an eye opener to me that, like, okay, in the future, I need to try to make these packs more versatile by kind of infringing less on people's direct strategies. In the PO pack, there wasn't really a way to do that, though, because I really did think that this was revolutionary in terms of simplification. By being able to reduce strategic options, you have to use these small bet sizings. And on top of that, they also maximally exploit the player pool imbalances because the guys just defend like shit versus the one-third sizings. So I thought it was really useful, but I saw the blowback from the community that was like, whoa, whoa, you're changing too much too quick. Um, and so I felt like it kind of had to happen. But in the future, I've put my, like with the last mental game pack, like anybody can pick that pack up. I don't care what style you play because it's much more mental oriented. It's just about like how to construct your thought process around the data points that are available from the environment. It really does not infringe at all upon like what strategy you want to play in terms of bet sizing schemes or if you want to check your whole range out of position or not. So you're saying I don't really have any six Mac knowledge, so should I put in a little work first? I think it's actually more important to have a base knowledge of how PO Solver works, like just an intro understanding of like how the equity, EV tabs, mixed strategies, like the functionality of that. because in the first part of the pack I go into a lot of based on pre-flop ranges, which I show how the range versus range interactions work for a lot of different formations on a lot of different textures. So that part I think gets sort of taken care of relatively quickly. And if you already have a context from different formats of poker, I don't see there being like a huge learning curve there. Um, that being said, like yeah, it couldn't hurt to cruise around in forums and get a little more familiar with six max through some videos. Um, I just worry that you're going to pick up strategy that then you're going to have to unlearn, and that's why I did it in this way with the site. Is like I feel like PO Unlocked course is like the intro the intro course that I could even offer a newbie, and it would save him time from having to unlearn other shit that wasn't as relevant for him. Um, so yeah, I sort of think it's both. I think you could benefit from being exposed to, what the norm is, and then that might give you more of, it might actually give you more of like an understanding of how much simpler the PO Unlocked way actually is, and it might give you a more of an appreciation of it or excitement around it. But it can't. It definitely. I don't think it can hurt to go like cruise around and watch some six max videos on Run At Once and read forums. Like it definitely can't hurt. You just have to do it with a healthy skepticism of whether or not these strategies that they're advocating are relevant for you or maximally incentivized. No problem, man. Is it healthy to be sort of anxious toward the thought that some players don't have an edge on you, even though you have a solid win rate at the limit? Oh, that some players have an edge on you, even though you have a solid win rate at the limit. Well, it goes back to what I said when I was talking about that video I just made. Is it healthy? No, because it shows that you're not clarified on what your purpose is. So maybe that's the better question to ask first. And this is on some deep mental shit, but like, why do you play poker? Is it to assert yourself as the best at the current limit that you're at? Or is it to make the most money? And are the two actually that different? Because if you want to be the best, I assume you want to be the best at high stakes, not at 200 and L. So the way that I see this is that the best is actually the one who takes the most incentivized response to whatever environment he's in at any given time. And that's why I'm almost not paying attention to the top 20% of regs at my limit. I'm deploying an exploitative blueprint that I think wins at the highest clip against the pool because I know that that's what's going to get me to high stakes fastest. And then I trust myself that I'll be able to recalibrate at high stakes when I'm there. So this idea of like, well, I want to be able to have a sustainable strategy that I know works at high stakes. That's cool if you don't trust yourself and if you feel like you're not able to calibrate, like, but that's realize that that's a weak-minded player that wants the sustainable strategy so he doesn't have to relearn anything once he gets to high stakes. I think that's one of the main skepticisms is like, if I play a highly exploitative strategy, that's not going to be able to work at high stakes. I'm going to have wasted so much time playing exploitatively on my climb when I could have been learning game theory that I would apply at high stakes. But that's wildly assumptive because the high stakes pools are still crazy imbalanced, especially if you're diversifying to like the B class networks and stuff like that. I tell guys this constantly. If your goal is to get to 1K NL on PokerStars, you're not thinking intelligently because those are the hardest games like probably in the world. Why would you not just go play 1020 on Bovada or 888 or some site that's B list that's available wherever you live where the action allows you to run at like 10 to 15 BBs per 100? Put your money on a couple of those sites, diversify your bankroll, diversify your volume, and do it that way. Guys ask me, Nick, why don't you have results at 500 Zoom? It's because we're too busy crushing 1020 on other sites. Like, it's just smarter. Um, so PO Unlocked could help a newbie or player that has wrong biases. Yeah, I mean, for sure. What that program does is simplifies the usage of PO Solver in a way that gives you practical strategies where you can't really fuck up the implementation of them because it reduces the amount of strategic options that you use. Meaning you'll be betting your entire range or checking your entire range on a lot of flop spots and not sacrificing much accuracy at all when doing it. In fact, I think it's better for newbies because the main problem I see with new guys is they compound a lot of mistakes out of position by playing bloated pots, by c-betting too much. This is one of the main ways that you exploit bad players who c-bet too much out of position. You float them a lot in position and then wait for them to check turn, and their range is destroyed, and they check fold too often. So a lot of the simplified strategies that I use are geared around either exploiting the player pool. That's why I like the 1/3 strategy. They fold to it too much, or checking range when we're out of position because it actually simplifies the game tree, gives you more vision over your vision and control over your range, and prevents you from making the most common mistake, which is to put too much money in a pot at too big of a range disadvantage. 7 says, I won't lie, my goal in poker is not the money. It has always been the competition and achieving top tier. I just always figured money would come with it. Yeah, it does. And I don't think the two have to be in conflict with each other because it's kind of like, okay, I use that example of Floyd Mayweather. Floyd Mayweather is an extremely aggressive offensive boxer, but on the surface it looks like he's defensive because he's a counterpuncher, meaning he only aggresses when he senses an imbalance in the opponent's posture, more or less, meaning that all of his jabs come at well-timed points where his opponent is vulnerable, and he doesn't go around he doesn't go around executing a GTO blueprint. Basically, he's all exploitative, but it looks defensive because he's so constantly in the pocket. And this is what I think high level. This is what I think the highest level of any art form is a strategy that almost looks defensive, but it's an extremely offensive style of counterpunching, basically. Because the only reason he's able to do that is because he's so in tune with his environment or his opponent in this case. So I think the pinnacle of the best players, like if you took a nosebleed guy and put him at 100 NL, I really think that the best nosebleed guys would play highly exploitative on the climb up because they would recognize that there's no point in not taking the incentives at hand and maximally exploiting them. They already know that they trust their ability to play well balanced, and they understand equilibriums to the degree that the way they visualize the game is to plot maximally exploitative strategy versus the imbalance, and if it iterates to some sort of equilibrium because they're countered, then so be it. But if not, that's how you play. That's how a bot would play too. So I think it's a perspective shift in that sense, that the exploitative strategy is actually the highest, the most advanced strategy to play from. And it doesn't matter if you want to play for money or competition. Like if you care about being efficient, like that's what this is about. It's about efficiency and accuracy on the climb up. Like why would you take a less efficient approach if the argument is that I don't feel like I'll be able to play these highly exploitative strategies at 510 and I want to practice the balanced strategy that I'll play when I'm there? Well, realize how that's a cop out for doing something more currently efficient. And it's not actually true. Like you can play highly exploitative strategies at 510, 1020. It might be different than what you're allowed to get away with on PokerStars 510, but the more I see my students emerging into 500 Zoom and stuff like that, it just doesn't even seem true. I've got guys who are crushing 500 Zoom, and telling me that the regs are still lazy, still don't counter well enough, still let you run them over, still don't respond the way that they should consistently enough, I guess you can say. I'm really interested in seeing how the 500 Zoom and 1K NL games on PokerStars develop. One of my goals right now, since I'm spending so much time on coaching, is I'm selecting certain players to basically go and destroy limits under my coaching. So I've got like a couple guys on Bovada that are already at 1020. Like I think I coach the best two players on Bovada. I think I'm about to be coaching the best player at 500 Zoom. And my vision as I scale this whole thing is to or not a stable, but to organize like an army of like guys who are on top of every single mid to high stakes NL limit, um, and have that be sort of like, I don't know, like not really like my ammunition or whatever, but just to like prove to myself that this stuff is actually sustainable at all environments. I think that's an important thing for me to sort of scale into. if this is going to have longevity and like credibility, I think it needs to show success in as many as environments as possible. So it's sort of at the top of my interest right now to make sure that I position guys at the top of every environment that they can have results and say, okay, these highly exploitative strategies and these mental game approaches actually are working and seem to be sustainable at all these different environments. Because at that point, that balances the research very well. I think that's why I'm interested in it. Is that like I understand that some of the holes in the argument have been that like most of my results came from Bovada 1020, and a lot of my students play on B class sites. I get that I should be putting some results up on PokerStars in order to sort of ease the paranoia that this is just a fluke. So it's something that I'm kind of aware of and interested in, and something that I'm sort of looking to scale into over 2017. Players on PokerStars France. What's up, Johnny? By the way, um, yeah, I had a couple guys on PokerStars Italy. Heard that it was extremely soft. Um, I'm not sure about France, but I'm guessing it's sort of the same story. Um, I think those sites are actually probably softer, like substantially softer than a site like 888. But honestly, basically any B list to C list site that you can get on that's not PokerStars that offers 510 and 1020, like that should be your goal to eventually make enough money wherever you're at to diversify to two or three different sites where you can put a substantial amount of volume in at 1020 or at 510 or above. Okay, guys, I'm going to take off. It's a beautiful day in central New York, so I'm going to go enjoy something outside. Thanks for everybody who stopped by. A lot of rants today, but I felt like this was a good balance to do something in terms of just mental game forum talk. And I hope that you guys can kind of learn from my experience in whatever way feels resonant for you. Like my hope in sharing my struggle is that somewhere along the way you find a way to bypass something that you don't need to learn anymore because you take it on faith from me. That being said, go out and do as much shit as possible so you can experiment, because I think it's massively important. Thanks, everyone. See you later.